Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to speak here. That's my topic. I will talk about the aspect of crisis, the ecological aspect of global crises. Not all, but many people might nowadays share the following view. We are facing serious ecological problems. Many of them are global as regards causes and consequences. And these ecological problems might lead to ecological catastrophes, as discussed by Jared Diamond in his famous book, Collapse. Mass migration perhaps may be one consequence of these ecological collapses. How can these ecological problems be solved? There are, of course, opposing answers to this question, ranging from technical innovation over economic degrowth to the demand for a fundamental change in our idea and relationship to nature. In my talk, I limit myself to reflections on the last named approach, the demand for a fundamental change in our idea of nature, namely, no longer to regard nature as a malleable object, but to acknowledge that there is a given order of nature that humans have to respect. This demand might basically contradict the Triple Helix model, which, according to Ladesdorff, emphasizes innovative reconstruction and includes the view that natural resources are epistemic objects and not naturally given objects. The claim that there is a given order of nature that humans have to respect is mostly grounded in theories of self-organization of nature. The argument typically runs as follows. As a result of a million-year spanning evolutionary history of life on Earth, everywhere on Earth, unique ecosystems have emerged, which are composed of characteristic sets of species. These species are tightly interlinked due to co-evolutionary processes and, consequently, interdependent in their existence. Some say these species together form a kind of superorganism. Most would prefer to speak of self-regulating systems. In any case, it is assumed that these ecosystems have reached an optimum as regards stability and efficiency of resource use. In other words, the naturally evolved ecosystems are said to exhibit maximum sustainable productivity. According to this view of nature, the current ecological problems result from the fact that humans have enforced a technical industrial exploitation of nature and manipulation of nature, which disrupts the naturally given ecosystems. It is argued that the only way to avoid ecological catastrophes is a fundamental change in our idea of nature. Perhaps one would say we must no longer regard nature as a malleable object, but have to acknowledge the given order of nature. Humans have to respect and to preserve the naturally given ecosystems. At most, humans can carefully and slightly alter these natural ecosystems. This view sometimes remains within a framework of anthropocentric ethics of nature. However, in most cases is it associated with ecocentrism, which vehemently opposes anthropocentric ethics and includes naturally evolved ecosystems into the moral community. An extreme opponent of the above-mentioned view of nature is the US-American biologist and leading early advocate of the modern environmental movement, Barry Commoner. Perhaps you know his natural law, nature knows best. Similarly, David Rappert has stated, I cite, that natural evolution of ecosystems represents the best of all possible worlds. More subtly, the view that nature consists of self-regulating and self-optimizing ecosystems is contained, example given in the resilience approach of the Resilience Alliance in Stockholm, and even in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment of the United Nations. Think of the supporting ecosystem services. This approach that I have just described may sound convincing. However, it exhibits fundamental shortcomings. I will address just two of them. First, the basic premise that the biosphere consists of tightly integrated, self-regulating ecosystems is extremely doubtful. Undoubtedly, this premise is widespread among lay people and in nature conservation. However, within the science of ecology, not the ideology of ecology or political ecology, in science of ecology, this view has been widely dismissed since the 1980s. That is for nearly 40 years. Nowadays, within the science of ecology, the biosphere is regarded as a permanently changing, flexible web of interacting species that is far from any equilibrium state. Please note, to understand nature as essentially changing and flexible is not to imply that humans could create ecosystems at will, ad libitum. But it implies that humans are not bound to naturally given ecosystems in order to implement ecologically sustainable development. Second shortcoming. The assumption that naturally evolved ecosystems exhibit optimal stability and efficiency is highly doubtful as well. And even if this assumption would apply, if it would hold true, what is not true, it would be unwarranted to conclude from an optimal intrinsic organization of ecosystems to optimal extrinsic usefulness of these ecosystems for humans. Please note again, to doubt nature's optimality, as I do, is not to say that human cultivation of land is always ecologically sustainable. It is just to say that humans are not bound to the naturally evolved ecosystems if they want to implement an ecologically sustainable development and to overcome ecological crises. Taken together, my reflections suggest the demanded of some, and not few, the demanded fundamental change in our idea of nature is not necessary to solve our ecological problems. And I suppose it's not sufficient at all. Rather, this demand should be rejected because of its doubtful premises and problematic implications. This conclusion sets the stage for two theses that I would like to present. First, the ultimate reference point in the discussion of ecological problems should not be nature, but always humankind. Ecological problems are about the loss of environments that are beneficial to humans, and they are not about destruction of nature. Second, in most cases, it is not lack of ecological knowledge that leads to the destruction of environments that are beneficial to humans. If, for example, the people in the Sahel lost their pastures as a consequence of precipitation decline driven by global warming, the problem is not lack of ecological knowledge. Among the primary causes of our severe ecological problems is neither a principal wrong view of nature, nor a point-by-point lack of ecological knowledge within a principally right view of nature. Rather, one primary cause is a lack of implementation of ecological knowledge. Most ecological problems have arisen because human behavior has not been determined by existing ecological knowledge about the detrimental consequences which certain forms of human use of nature do have to the natural environment of other humans, not to nature. Mostly, this lack of implementation represents a case of the so-called tragedy of the commons. However, it should be added. Mostly, it also represents a case of environmental injustice. Some humans are much more suffering from the detrimental consequences than other humans. And, what is more, many just suffer without any chance to profitate. As you know, there is no consensus on how to solve tragedies of the commons. To internalize all externalities is one prominent approach. But I will not delve into this discussion. I'm not an economist or sociologist. Instead, I would like to highlight that none of these proposals involves a fundamental change in our idea of nature. To conclude, in this light, the solution of the ecological problems turns out to be not a problem of the human-nature relationships, but rather a problem of human-human relationships. We do not need a fundamental change in our view of nature, but rather fundamental social political changes in order to solve our serious ecological problems and to prevent example-given social problems that are bound to environmental migration and so on. Thank you.